Hi, my name is Mary, and I've been a knitter most all my life. My grandmother taught me to knit when I was a child, and it's something I've enjoyed for many years. About a year ago, I learned that I was going to have my right arm amputated. I had had cancer that kept coming back for about 5 years. I had 6 surgeries, 3 rounds of radiation, but it just kept coming back, and finally they couldn't do any more surgery or radiation. One of my first thoughts was, would I be able to knit still? And I thought probably not, but I really spent a lot of time thinking about it, and 3 weeks after the amputation I came up with a way to knit with one hand. As a little less than a year ago, I had my right arm amputated above the elbow, so you can see that there's no way I can use that for knitting. The first problem was how to hold the second needle, and at first what I did was put it in my right armpit. I did wrap it with a piece of, this is Dicem, D-Y-C-E-M, and it's sticky, but it doesn't come off on you, and it just keeps things from moving. It's very handy in the kitchen for me and so forth. But I would wrap it and then I would put it here, and it wouldn't wiggle very much. But that got somewhat tiring, and I did some more research and found out that in the Shetland Islands centuries ago, they used something called a knitting belt. And if you Google that, you can learn more about it. You can buy them in the UK, but there's one woman in Minnesota that makes them. So I ordered this from her. She sells them on Etsy, and they cost about $40, and it works really well for me. With the knitting belt, you have to use double-pointed needles. The woman that makes the knitting belts also sells extra long double-pointed needles if you need longer than what you generally buy in a store. So a knitting belt has a back of leather and a front of leather with these holes in it, and you just jam the needle in to the knitting belt, and then that holds the needle and it doesn't bother my hand. Then the other thing was what to do about the working yarn. As you know, in the knit stitch you usually have the yarn on the far side of the knitting and in the purl stitch on the near side, but finding a way to change it was going to be difficult. I watched a lot of videos about something called Portuguese knitting. Andrea Wong does a really nice job, and I'm grateful to her. She doesn't know me, but her videos really helped me. Portuguese knitting is intended for 2 hands, but I was able to figure out a way to modify it and make it for 1 hand. In Portuguese knitting, you either wrap the yarn around your neck like this, or you wrap it around a knitting pin. Okay, this is a Portuguese knitting pin. This came in a set of 2, and I got them in a knitting store, but you can also get them on Amazon and other places. Some of them pin on, some of them stay on with a magnet. I just found it easiest to put it on. This is just a name tag holder, and then I put it over my head, and it's just right there. So what you do is bring the yarn from your work through the knitting pin or around your neck. You put it over your middle finger to make like a ring, and that tensions it. And then you're ready to knit. And now I'm going to show you how to do the knit stitch with the yarn in the front like this. Okay, in a normal knit stitch, you put the right hand needle in to the left side of the first loop, and you come out in the back of that loop. This is a little bit different. You go in the same place in the left side of the first loop, but you bring that right needle forward of the left needle. So the right needle's in front of the left needle. Both are still in that loop. You flick the yarn around with your thumb, and then you bring that stitch out the way you went in and slide it off the needle. And there's your regular knit stitch. And you see the yarn is at the back of that stitch, even though I'm holding the yarn in front. Let's do it again. The needle goes into the left side of the loop, but doesn't come out the back, comes up the front of the left-hand needle. You wrap the yarn around with your thumb. You take it back out the way you came in and slide it off. Into the left side, in front of the left needle, wrap the yarn around, out the way you came in and off. And see, as you get used to it, you can go faster. And even though I have just one hand, it's not precarious, nothing's going to fall. Even if I have to let go of it, nothing happens. So that's the knit stitch. If this comes out, you just slide it back in again and keep going. When you need to slide the yarn down, you just do it. In front of the left needle, around, out, and off. Okay, now I'm going to show you the purl stitch, which is actually easier than the knit stitch. Again, my empty needle is in the knitting belt, and I put the working yarn through the knitting pin around my third finger to tension it, and then I'm ready to go. A regular purl stitch, you go in the needle from the right side to the front of the left side, and I do exactly the same thing. I wrap the yarn with my thumb, take it out the back and off, just like a regular purl stitch. In from the right to the left, wrap the yarn with the thumb, take it out the back and off. I'll do it real slowly. In this loop from the right side to the left side, and you're keeping the right needle in front of the left needle the whole time. You wrap the yarn counterclockwise around the right needle. You take it out the way you came in, out of that loop, and you drop the old stitch off, and you have a new stitch on the right needle. Take it in, wrap around, out, and off. In, wrap around, out and off. In, wrap around, out and off. And as you see, you can develop some speed as you practice it. The pattern I'm using on this sample is a pattern I'm using to make Afghans. Those are like blankets for my grandchildren. I make one for each one as they go off to college. I was able to make two before I lost my arm, but there's a granddaughter that graduated this June, is leaving this month for college, and I was able to make her Afghan over 6 feet tall with after I lost my arm. The pattern is a 3-row repeat. That's why it's reversible. And it calls for a knit row with the patterning, then a purl row, then a knit row. But because purling is easier in this kind of knitting, I changed it to a purl row, knit row, purl row. So whenever you're doing knitting, if you use this kind, you want to do as much purling as possible. So now I'm going to do a few stitches and show you how you do the pattern. This starts with a purl stitch, and then the next thing is purl two together. which I haven't shown you, but it's just the way you normally do. You stick the needle in, so you have 2 stitches on the needle. You wrap the yarn around, take the yarn out of the 2 stitches and off. So I have reduced 1 stitch. Then you purl 6 in a row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And now you can probably see that there are some yarn overs there. So you do a yarn over and just wrap it around with your thumb the normal way. Then you purl 1. And then you do another yarn over, flick it with your thumb, and then you continue purling. So even doing patterning is not difficult with this way of knitting. Now I'm going to show you how to cast on with this method. Again, it's similar to what they do in Portuguese knitting, but it's different because it's only done with one hand. You want to have the end of your yarn long enough for the number of stitches you want to cast on. It's somewhat like the long tail cast on, but also different. So you have your end here. You put your yarn through your knitting pin, around your 3rd finger to tension it, and then you hold this yarn in your hand. So you've got all of it here. Take this yarn and make sort of a loop around your finger. And you put the needle that's in the knitting belt into that loop. It's very loose, but that's okay. You flick the yarn with your thumb, like you did for knitting and especially for purling, around that, and then take that loop off and adjust it. Pull it, not too tight, but tight enough to make a stitch. Again, you take this tail, you wrap it over your index finger, you put the needle in, flick the yarn over with your thumb, bring that loop back off, and adjust it. Wrap it around the index finger. See, it's going from the work up and around the finger and then straight down. Put the needle into that loop, flick with your thumb, take that loop off, and adjust. In, around, out, off. And now I'm going to show you how to cast off, although there are a number of different cast off methods, and I think most any of them would work. I'm going to do a purl row because, again, purling is easier with this method, but you could do it with a knit row also. So you purl the first 2 together, and we showed that before. And what I like about this method is you can keep this stitch very loose, very big. Often cast off methods are too tight, so I like to keep that nice and loose, and then you put it back on the left hand needle, and then you once again purl 2 together, and you end up with 1 stitch on the right. Keep it very loose and big. Put it back on the left hand needle and purl 2 together again. Every time you have 1 stitch on the right hand needle, and you could then put it back on the left hand needle and purl 2 together. And that you can keep it loose and control how tight your cast off is. So that is my one-handed knitting. Knitting, purling, casting on, and casting off, and it has worked very well for me. Um, my granddaughter going to college this fall chose colors for her Afghan about 4 or 5 months after I had my amputation, and I was able to finish her Afghan so she's ready to take it to college. And I'll close with a picture of me and my granddaughter and the Afghan I knitted with one hand. Thank you and good luck to you.